Thank you for coming tonight to our second week of following the footsteps of Jesus. Last week was a lot of fun as we went through. So I got more pictures this time, but we'll go through them a little faster. And this is your handout. So I had it right here to show you. So this is actually what Israel looks like right now. So when we came in to Tel Aviv. That's where you fly in at Ben-Hur Airport. And then from there, we went this time up to Nazareth. So right here is Nazareth. There is 70, 80 miles from Nazareth all the way down to Jerusalem. But then they went to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is about 4 miles southeast of Jerusalem. And then from there, we will see that Jesus went down to Egypt, which is about 40 miles. And he came back to Jerusalem. Then they went up to Nazareth. And there is 70 miles, so yeah, it's about 110 miles from Egypt to Nazareth. From Nazareth, if you go on up, here's the Golan Heights. This is Lebanon. So when we were up Mount Hermon, it's on one of these other ones, but anyway, we were right up here. So we were literally just right by where they fired the missile like 2 days after we were there. And when we were down here at Hebron, this whole thing, we'll see one of the other pictures, this is all the West Bank. Actually, I think this is West Bank, sorry, this Bank, but this is all Palestine. So really, when they talk about Israel needing to give the land up, this is all the land that Israel has that they can actually claim. I mean, they own it all, but the Palestinians are occupying all this and all of this. So they really do not have, the whole state's the size of New Jersey, so there's not that much room. So here shows you.
This is just a question that's happening right now. Can you or did you go through the West Bank?
Yeah, we were, and we, Ron.
In an armored bus, we were.
Well,
so that's how you travel.
And Ron, though, we walked the streets.
Yeah, we did. We walked the street, but the Hebron is not in the West Bank.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, is it? I guess it is.
Do
It's
you
around the edge.
think you would
It's
today?
around the edge. Yeah, we did. Well, and then like what, 2 days after we were there was when Palestine did an uprising, so we would not have been able to go. But while we were there, yeah, we were literally walking the gates, like the chain link fence between.
Because like it's even within the areas, it's like Israel controls this area, Palestine controls this area, Israel controls it. Yeah.
Even the Cave of the Patriarchs, and it was the military compound, it was split in half. And so, and I've got some pictures of that on here, I'll show you, but the part that actually houses the tomb of Abraham, Isaac, Rachel, Sarah's off.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, that's now in Muslim control. That's their half of it. And so they just decided 2 years ago, you can't go in and see it anymore. I mean, they had been in prior. So this just kind of shows you again. So when Jesus started out, he started from Nazareth and he went up here to Capernaum. Well, we said he went right here, I think is where he's baptized at Bethsaida. Some say at the bottom, but either way, he went off in the wilderness, either went up north or he went down south. But he comes back right here to Capernaum. So it makes more sense if he was up here that this is where he would have ended up. At Capernaum, and then that's where he calls Peter, James, and John, Andrew. And then Magdal is right here. We looked at that. That's where Mary Magdalene is from. And this is where the wedding of Cana was at. So it's all pretty kind of close, but of course it's really hilly, so you get lost even driving around. It takes a lot more to walk it than if you were just walking Nebraska, where it's straight.
Right, where it's straight and flat, yeah.
Yeah, this one just kind of shows you again, this whole area on the east side of the Sea of Galilee is Decapolis. There's the Sea of Galilee, it's called the Lake Tiberias. If you hear the Lake of Tiberias, it's the same thing as the Sea of Galilee. And then I just kind of put these up, so that way you can just kind of follow his timeline where he would have walked. Sea of Galilee right here is where he walked on the water, and they only went halfway. But I put this one on because if you see right across on the other side, that's Geaserret. That's where he healed the demoniac that had the legion of demons in him, and the pigs ran into the Sea of Galilee on this side. But it wasn't close. They had to run about 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile to even get to the lake. He makes many trips, so think about this. They all had to. So from here all the way down to Jerusalem, They were called to go, what is it, at least once a year?
A year. But yes, it was a long ways to go. If you look up where they were at Capernaum, and then he did go back to Nazareth. We talked about that last time, but then he did the reading for the first time in the temple and kind of declared himself the Son of God for the first time, and they ran him out of Nazareth, and he didn't go back because they would have killed him. That would have been required by Jewish law, because at that point in time they felt like that was beyond sacrilege. But yeah, it was a long walk, and this is, as Penny mentioned, it's not just like walking from here to Grand Island flat. It's like the entire terrain of the United States is crammed into that country. So there's mountains and there's desert and there's valleys and all of that. So it's not just a straight shot.
And then we're going to look later on where he goes to Bethany, where Lazarus' tomb is, and the woman at the well. I found her pictures for that too. So this is where he takes off. We said he goes up north. And this is Banias. This is, you can find it as Banias, you can find it as Banias with a P, or it's called the Gates of Hell. And these are actually what they found there. These are from all the Roman temples. So Caesarea Philippi is also the other name of it. Why is this important? Why did Jesus go there? He took his disciples up north. This is at the base of Mount Hermon. And it is there as he gets over. It's gorgeous now. It's a state park with waterfalls. But this is where they had their altars to Zeus. This was literally where the temple to Zeus, the temple to Pan, the temple to Nemesis stood. You can see all the little niches in the rock. That's where they put all their little statues. This is what it would have looked like back then. So you have Zeus, the Zeus is here, Nemesis, and then this whole area was Pan and the dancing goats, and kind of weird. But anyway, we had a chance to see that, what it would have looked like back in its day. So this is where the pagans came, and that's where they came to worship. I put that one up there because I thought this was just cool. I was fascinated. I mean, that's like a stone from 3,000 years ago that's still there. And I mean, you could touch it and just think about all the people who walked on that. So this right behind here is what they call the Gates of Hell. Now, why they call it that is because there's a spring, a water system there, but they've put a plumb line down. They can't find the bottom. And so, from way back when, the pagans would believe that that was the portal to the underworld, and they would put sacrifices in there. And if whatever the goats that they sacrificed, if it raised to the top, that meant the gods didn't approve it. If it didn't raise, then that meant they approved it. So it's kind of just stuck. But why is this important again? Because Jesus comes, and there's this big massive rock right over here on the side. They've moved it. It used to be on this side. And when he brings his disciples up there, and if you've watched The Chosen this year, this season, they do a really cool job of this, remaking this spot. and the disciples are just like, why are we here? This is, so against everything. This is so unclean. And he says, well, who do people say that I am?
What do some people say? A prophet, a teacher.
John the Baptist, Elijah.
Right.
And then Jesus looks at him and he says, but who do you say I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Christ. And he says, blessed are you because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, only the Spirit of God himself. And he says, I tell you that I will build my church. Everyone thinks he meant building his church on Peter. It could be a dual thing, but he's talking about even right here. There isn't any place that he will not build his church on. And he says, even on this rock, and he was pointing, there's actually this big rock right there. He says, I will build my church upon this rock. And he says, even the gates of hell will not prevail from it. So it wasn't a figurative speech. It was literally right there. And he was saying that was, at the time, that was encompassing all of the evil that the Jews could think of. And he's saying, even that is no match for the Son of God or for my church.
And even they will not be excluded if they are willing.
Yep. So that's just some of the pictures there. Now on the way there, and I'm kind of backtracking because we went to Gilgal and then Banias. But on that little jaunt between the two is called the Golan Heights. And in the Old Testament, I talked about this along. It was the Hills of Bishon. If you remember reading in the Old Testament about the cows of Bishon, that's because up on that top, it is very fertile. There's lots of grass, there's lots of trees, there's lots of vegetation.
It's beautiful.
This is the spot of milk and honey. And I asked our tour guide, I said, okay, this has been driving me nuts. Why is it called the land of milk and honey? Well, because everywhere else is pretty barren and wasteland. And he said, if you have grass, you have enough for cows, so you'll have milk. And because of the flowers, it'll bring bees in, so then you will have honey. So when it says it's the land of milk and honey, it means it has everything they need resource-wise to have the cows, to have the livestock, to have the bees, the flowers, the whole nine yards. And the cows there were different. Oh my gosh, as we were driving, their legs were like
they were
tree trunks. I mean, it was just totally, it was like, if you've seen low lines that we're now breeding here in America, it's like the short Angus of old. That's a little closer to what these were like. They're not as tall, but just huge.
They were beefy.
Yeah. So the Golan Heights, way up there, that is where the 6-Day War, part of it was. The tour guide I had the time before, 4 years ago, he was in the military, and boy, he was just all about that. They still even have some of the tanks and jeeps up there from when Israel conquered. That was in 69?
I'm thinking 69.
Something like that.
Yeah. That's what popped into my head.
So now as we were going, why were we headed there? We're headed to on this top of this Golan Height because Jesus would have also gone there. But this is a Serpent Mount. And this is what Mount Hermon looks like. Why is Mount Hermon important? It's the place of the Transfiguration, where Jesus took Peter, James, and John, which again, we said Banias, gates of hell are at the bottom. It's up on top, that he was transfigured before the three of them. And it's just another, at that particular time when we went, there was quite a bit of snow up, and they do skiing and all sorts of stuff. This area where the Serpent Mount is called the Valley of Shades, the Valley of Travelers. You probably know it best as what? The Valley of the Shadow of Death in Psalms 23. That's this valley right here that runs north and south.
It does not mean exactly what you think.
No, it does not. So this is Gagal Rephim, and that's where we were headed. That was like the main thing kind of on this trip, what sets this one apart. When I said we went where there were no roads, it was true. It had rained, and it was muddy. Oh, there's Kristen right there. I took the picture from over here. See, you can tell a farm girl because they're all trying to figure out how to get across, and I just went beep, 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 beep over all the rocks. And then I took pictures of everybody else as they were coming across. The bus got stuck, and so we actually had to walk to even get over here. But it was kind of cool. So as we were walking, continue to do, what is Gagal Rephim? It is the Wheel of the Giants. The original, now they just found this out. This is totally interesting because the original structure they thought was what, 4,000 years old?
That's what they were thinking.
And then when they really get to digging, they found that the original structure is over 6,000 years old.
So this has been a sacred site for a long time because that's one of the things we talked about last time. If there's something that's sacred, and somebody new comes in, they build whatever is sacred to them on top of it. So if it used to be a temple, now it's a church, now it's a mosque, like they just keep. So there's lots of layers of whatever it is.
So this is like a labyrinth almost, but in the center, that's where we walked and actually went up and I went down into it.
I did not.
Some even believe that that is where they buried Nimrod, because they believe that's a portal, again, to another world, and so they were hoping to try to resurrect him. But that Serpent Mount is where they buried the giants. So when you read about this stuff in the Bible, it really is true. It's not fairy tales. It's not just something out there. But this is an aerial shot. This is called a cross, right, what is it, a cross flower or something? Anyway, it's in the shape of a cross. I saved some, and even though I dried them out, they molded, so I don't have them to show you. So this was Derek Gilbert that we went with, him and Sharon, and this was one of the, that was Ron, one of the tour guides. He is a Messianic Jew. So that is on top of the structure, and that is from me inside. I was inside, and there's a hole and an opening, and basically what it is, it lets light in at the summer and the winter solstice. Well, maybe the spring and fall too, because we were there at spring. Now, we know that people are using this because somebody had been in there the night before and had candles, and I don't know what they were trying to conjure up, but anyway, it was interesting. But you had to crawl down in through the top of this, and then you had to crawl down into this hole, and then there was a big divot down below. I don't know, took a picture of it.
That's the top. That's where I was.
So when you're trying to walk on that, some rocks are steady and they're like in there pretty tight, and then there's a lot of them that are just really loose, and so you never know what you're going to get. So there we are.
On the top.
She-Womans. But these are the size of these rocks, so just think about that. If these are over 6,000 years ago, these rocks are way bigger than that picture shows. I don't know how they moved it. I really, really don't know how they moved it. Unless this is the whole area of the giants, so it wouldn't probably be as hard for them. Now this is, I kept talking about the Serpent Mount. This is part of it, and this is what it looks like right here from aerial view. We have one in Ohio that's only 3 foot tall. This is actually 30 feet tall.
It's massive.
40 feet tall, 20 feet wide, something like that.
It's massive, massive.
And there's all these little black specks are dolmens. Now I've talked about this a little bit, but a dolmen is like they make it table, and they would do food and drink offerings to those that were dead. I just find it interesting that it's called serpent, and there's 2 big dolmens right here and right here, kind of make eyes and a nose that you could see from.
And then it's right by Gagal Rephim, which is the wheel of the giants.
Right there.
And actually, the people that we were on the tour with, they found it on Google Earth. Like by accident, they were looking at photos, aerial photos of Gagal Rephim, and just kind of spread out and discovered the Serpent Mount. It hadn't been discovered that that's what the shape it was, or that's what it was, until like within the last,
just, I don't know, 10 years?
That's what I was going to say, 10 years. So.
Well, in Ohio's is like 1/4 of a mile long, and this one's like 3 miles long. I mean, it's not small. It's huge. But these were some of the, when we came back, we were going by, they had cherry trees, they have groves there, and they had flowers that were kind of pretty, and we stopped to get lunch.
We did.
That's when I broke my finger,
Yes,
and I needed a popsicle stick to do triage. So gummy bears to take away the pain. Popsicle stick for triage. But this was just their chocolate, and I thought it was really cool because it's all Hebrew. And so the 650 is what it would be in Israeli money. Israeli money is basically 30 cents on the dollar. So it was about $2 and, yeah, about 25 cents, something like that. So here they have more. This would be grapes. This would be a vineyard. And I just kind of threw these in so you could kind of get an idea of a flair for the different towns. Some were really nice, some were not. In the same town, it's just like if you're driving through a bad part of Chicago and a good part, what's taken up. Okay, so I put this one in because, so this is coming down from Golan Heights, and I said Decapolis. Decapolis is right here, okay? Depending on your map, it's spelled Geaserret. They have this actually on the other side on one of the maps, but it's on the Decapolis side. And that is where this site is. This is where I went 4 years ago. So when Jesus is walking, so he was going on the side he wasn't supposed to go, took his disciples with him. Who do they meet but this gentleman who's possessed? And he won't let them go any farther. They were in the tombs and they scared everybody away. Well, since Jesus had done that, it was a holy site, they built a church on it. And then they built another church, and this was like the ruins of the 3rd church that had been on the same site. As you can see, they marked the chapel of the first one. But this is the hill. So it's not like it's a big mountain like you would think. I mean, we had to walk up a ways, but now, I had a picture, and you can't really see it very well, but you have to go clear through past all this. The Sea of Galilee is like basically over here. So that's why I said when the pigs had to run, they had to run clear down the hill, and they had to run for a good half a mile to 3/4 mile. It's like a mile away now, the water, but it's receded that much. just to get to it. But the cool thing is the ruins. We showed you last week the olive press, and that's what they have right here. These are still, I mean, we're still talking 2,000 years ago. Here's where they crank it down and press it, and then it trickles down into here. And I said, why on earth did they just have an open vat? And they said, well, because they would fill it with water. So the oil would go in there, they would fill it with water, and the oil would rise to the top, it would displace, the water would go to the bottom, and then they would just scoop out the oil. It was like, wow, that was ingenious. And last week, I just threw these pictures in for you. Last week we talked about on that side of the Sea of Galilee, so this would be straight across from Geaserret, from Decapolis. This is the church that marks where Jesus, they think, really called Peter and Andrew, which is just, yeah, just down the corner from Capernaum. And that's what it looks like. And why they say that here was probably it, because it's the only spot where you can really get boats into the lake easily.
Yeah, all the other places we were at, it was very difficult. It wouldn't have been as easy to get in.
Yep. So this is just some more of some of the buildings there. It's out of concrete, so they don't go bad. So if they don't finish it, they don't finish it. And then if they decide 20 years from now to finish it, they just pick up where they left off. Then you had some that were a lot nicer, and a lot nicer. It's just some of the hillside. A lot, again, of agriculture. The various different, I mean, it's just weird how many different things that they can grow in such a small.
Well, and they terrace it all, and that's really.
Okay, so you talked about Samaria and the West Bank. So we were in that area, and that's where this is. We were up on Mount Gerizim. Why is Mount Gerizim important? Because that is where Jesus decided to take the disciples. Instead of going around Jerusalem, he went through Samaria. That was a no-no. Even back then, you didn't go through Samaria. And it was at that particular place, and right here, this church is over the top of Jacob's well. So I want you, if you could just kind of picture this, okay? We have Jacob's well on this side. We have Jacob's tomb over here on this side. Or Joseph's tomb, sorry, Joseph's tomb. We're talking Joseph from the coat of many colors. We're talking old Joseph, not Jesus' dad. So this is 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And Jesus comes here, and the woman is drawing water from that same well. 3,000 years later. I mean, that just blows my mind when you think about it. I mean, we just don't have anything like that.
No, we don't.
And in the grand scheme of things,
They're
it's
not
literally
very far
across the way. I mean,
Right.
we're talking 4 blocks away, pretty much.
Yeah, they were very close.
Yep, there's a picture from up above. So if you can kind of see it up here, there's the well. And there's Joseph's tomb. It's kind of in that area. It's kind of hard to see from the shot, but you have to realize we were clear up on Mount Gerizim. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because the lady at the woman at the well, she says, "Are you better than Jacob who dug this well?" And he goes, basically, yes. And she perceives that he's the Messiah, but she starts talking about worshiping on mountains. All right, this goes back to the deportation and everything, but Jesus was saying that Jerusalem, that's what the Jews have all said, that Jerusalem is the holy mountain. That's where the Jews worship God. Samaritans were considered half-breeds, and during that deportation, they built a temple on top of Mount Gerizim to worship God. So there has been this struggle and this fight for thousands and thousands of years between which mountain they were supposed to worship God on. And Jesus says to her, very truly, I tell you, there's going to come a day when it's not even going to matter. Man.
Do you want a cough drop?
I was going to say, I don't know where it's coming from. Oh, thank you. I kicked on the furnace. I wonder if it's kicking out something. So that's why what the mountain we were standing on was literally the mountain where they would have had their temple.
Well, and going back even farther, between Gerizim and Ebal, if you go all the way back to
Joshua?
Thank you. I was like, not Joseph, Joshua. That was where, when they crossed into the promised land, Joshua built the altar on Mount Ebal to thank God and to make that sacrifice. And they just found that altar 20 years ago, like in the 80s. And Mount Ebal is the Mount of Curses, and Mount Gerizim was the Mount of Blessings. And it talks about that in the Old Testament as well. So I mean, all of this is, there's such rich history in each location and so many different levels of stories.
So here's Mount Tabor. I just throw this in because I'm sure Jesus went by it. How could he not?
Because it's, yeah, Mount Kabir is, we stood on one and looked at the other two.
This is literally the oak of Morah that God met Abraham, took him to, and showed him everything below, and said, this is all going to be yours and your descendants, and they will be like the sands of the sea.
Standing there on that and recognizing that that's what had happened and looking out over it going, holy cow. It was
literally standing where Abraham would have been standing. It was just seeing
and encountering
what he saw. Because it's not a big mountain. It's pretty small. I mean, there was basically for our bus, one bus.
Yep.
That's about all we could fit on that ridge.
Yeah, because we did just one bus at a time at that point in time. We weren't all up there.
No. So then, okay, so we've kind of walked around where Jesus has been. We walked around that sea. We looked most of that last week. I just wanted to touch on some of the outlying areas around that sea. But we're going to bring it into Jerusalem because he made that trek many times to Jerusalem and back because they were required to go for the different festivals. This is Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. I did not get to go the first time. It was beyond emotional overload.
It was.
Mostly, for me, what got me at the end was what they kept saying about they never saw it coming. And the way it leads you through this, I was just seeing so much of a repeat of that. It was, which actually October 7th was really kind of that repeat. But when you come out of this, that's what you see. You go down in under the ground and you snake through this museum. That's unbelievable. And then you work your way up so that you come out to this view overlooking Israel.
And the name Yad Vashem means a memory and a name, because they have a hall of names, and all of the names of the Holocaust victims that they know of are on the wall in that room. But their promise and their goal with this is to make sure that their names are not forgotten and that people don't forget that the memory is kept alive.
And they have stories of all of them going through. Now so that peak, if you're standing outside, the architect who did this on purpose. Because you literally walk the sidewalk through here, and if you're not paying attention, you walk right on through it. I did, I didn't even realize it. But if you look down, you can see the people below there, and that was the whole reason why he did that. How we get so busy with our lives and we go about our daily stuff that we are
kind of oblivious.
Oblivious, yes, or ignorant to what's going on around us. Kind of what happened then. Anyway, so this is Jerusalem, and they have Tiffany's. They have all the high-name stores as well. And I put that down in for Deanna. But the cool thing was, God's good. So when I went 4 years ago, I had bought a trunk coin, a friend of mine, and I had bought some from Gotti. He was our tour guide that we had back then with Jonathan Kahn. And long story short, they couldn't take the card and they needed cash, and we almost had all the cash, but not quite. And he's like, oh, never mind, we were always going to connect, and it just didn't happen. And this has bugged me for 4 years because I hadn't been able to give him his $40. And even before I left, he was on my mind again, and I said, okay, God, I said, if I'm supposed to give him the money, put him in my path. And we just happened, because they let us go and get lunch and do whatever. We came back after lunch, and as I'm standing there waiting with everybody else, God, he comes right around the corner. And I go walking right up to him, and I put $40 in his hand, and he was blown. Oh, wait, it was great to catch up with him. Actually, he was buying guitar strings for his daughter's guitar there at the music store. This was just looking as we went out of Jerusalem.
Right.
Now, this is actually going into Bethany. We did not get to go to the tomb of Lazarus. I just put these pictures up real quick because I wanted you to see. Bethpage is just right there on that Mount of Olives. It's not that far away. So Jesus would have come into this town. That's where he ate with Mary and Martha. That's where Mary anointed his feet. And it is where he went back after Lazarus had died. This is actually the tomb of Lazarus. You can walk in it. They've preserved it this entire time. I wonder if he used it the second time. I don't know, I'm just curious.
Probably not.
Oh, wait a minute, tickle. This is driving me nuts.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, so that was when I went with Carla 4 years ago. This is just the outside of Jerusalem. This is the wall. They have the wall that goes all the way around. And you can walk it. It's like a mile to walk around. So it's not that big, the whole inside part of the old city.
Old city, right.
Do you know what all this is?
Looks like a cemetery.
It is. That's exactly it. It is a cemetery. This is going up towards the Mount of Olives. This whole thing here is Jewish cemetery. On the other side is Arab cemetery, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But inside those walls, they have kept ruins from Rome when they were occupying it, when they had their big palaces and colosseums, and some of the archways still left. But this is what the city looks like when you're walking through it. This is original stuff. Very narrow. The Lion's Gate, if you've heard of the Lion's Gate, that's kind of a main one that they take you through now. Why did I put this in here? This right here is the Pool of Bethesda. It was the only thing I was extremely disappointed about on the trip when I went 4 years ago. I wanted to get water from the Pool of Bethesda, and there is nothing there anymore. That's what it looks like. It was a pagan pool. It was, actually, it was a temple to Artemis. And that's why when Jesus goes to the paralyzed man, he asks him if he wants to be healed, because he's going, why are you here? No good God-fearing Jew would be caught dead at the Pool of Bethesda for some off chance of a rumor that an angel may come and heal you if you're the first one in the pool. And that's where he heals him.
And one of the first times he gets in trouble for it because it was on the Sabbath.
Yep. But it goes back quite a ways. This, so right around the corner from that is this church. And it is the church of Mary's mother. So the statue here, this is Mary when she was a child, and her mom. Now, why is this so cool? Because this particular church, the acoustics are unbelievable. They bring you in there and then they ask, will somebody sing? And I mean, it just gives you goosebumps the minute you even start to do anything. It's just gorgeous. That shows you how narrow the streets are. So to try to get 2 cars through there, it was crazy. This door, I took a picture of this one. Can you just think of the hands of the Roman soldiers that touched that? So then Bethlehem, I said, is just 4 miles from Jerusalem. But in Jerusalem, they have a store. And Bethlehem is known for their wood carvings. And so they have a store there in Jerusalem where they bring all these wood carvings. This is all out of a single piece of wood. So this was the Lord's Supper. I love that one with the calming the storm. There's another one, the Lord's Supper. You just imagine, I mean, these things were big too. I mean, they were massive. Ark of the Covenant. That is a full mock of the temple itself. All those little pieces of wood. Washing Jesus' feet. This is where he pulls Peter out of the water and the big miraculous catch. And then that brings me then to
Jerusalem, the model.
this was at the museum. This was at the Book of the Shrine. This was a gentleman in 1967 who made this entire model of the whole city of Old Jerusalem. And he did it in what? Like 2
It
years?
was an incredibly short amount of time, given the detail and everything that went into it. And it's massive.
Well, you can see, look how little the people are on the other side. But
Is
this
it
gives you a...
concrete?
Huh?
Concrete or stone?
Stone and mortar and, yeah. Like even the little roofs. I mean, he had the little colored stones for that. But this just gives you an idea of how houses would have been laid out. This would have been a courtyard for one of the Pharisees, actually. I didn't have a lot of here, but this is when they talk about a watchtower. That would be a watchtower. This was the different roads that were coming in that Rome would go through. Right here was the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
That's the Colosseum. What do you think about that? Even made the Colosseum. That just blows your mind away. And so you're coming back around the side, and then you get to this whole area is where the temple was at. So when it talks about the inner and the outer courts, this would be the outer courts, this would be the inner courts. Women were not allowed in the inner courts. They could only be in the outer ones. And then when you get in here, this was reserved for the priests. And then this right in here is where they went in, where the Holy of Holies was. And you go through that, and that's where the curtain was at that was ripped into two. And I've talked about the golden doors. The golden doors were here in front, and after Jesus died, and that earthquake happened, the doors were ajar, and they will never shut again.
because he came to remove the barrier between us and God.
That's right. This is what now is the Eastern Gate, but that was the Golden Gate back when, and that would have been the gate that Jesus rode through on Palm Sunday.
So the walls are massive in height.
That's just a little closer picture of what that would look like. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And Jesus stood there and said, "Very truly I tell you, not one stone will remain on top of another." It'll all be torn down. And it was in 70 years. But he's also talking about his body in 3 days that he would be resurrected. So as we're coming around the corner, we're getting ready to go into the Book of the Shrine. And this was...
Shrine of the Book.
Shrine of the Book. Thank you. This is just another... one of the things that they would have had in Samaria, but why I put it up here was the bovine. We talked about Baal, which is the cow, the head, the horns and everything. It's on everything there. From stuff way back 6,000 years ago and beyond. This is what the Shrine of the Book, see, I would have gotten it right because I put it in.
They put it in there, I know. And the Shrine of the Book is literally just there to house all of the manuscripts and sort of leave or give tributes to the manuscripts of the Bible and the
It's ones from Qumran.
Qumran, yeah.
This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are kept, a lot of it. In fact, they have an entire full version of the book of Isaiah, and it's upstairs. You can see it, you can read it, and it is word for word what our Bible is.
It's amazing to see.
So that's why when they say not one jot, not one tittle will be changed, it has preserved the test of time. So this is where they found it. So we looked at Qumran last week, where the young shepherd boy threw the stone and hit the vase and it shattered and he went in, and that's when they found all these scrolls. Well, this is what it looked like when they were starting to try to unroll them and piece them together. You just look at all the, oh gosh, I can't even imagine trying to piece all that. That's what one of the jars would have looked like.
And just the fact that it had survived in those caves for all those thousands of years, God had a hand in that for sure. Because it's clay. I mean, we're not talking that that's made out of cement.
Well, so they found it in 47. In 48, Israel becomes a nation. Those had been hidden for over 2,000 years and showed up right before Israel became a nation. I don't think it's happenstance. So this is what it would have looked like, Isaiah, all rolled up. Then they had to start unrolling. And this is Qumran. We looked at those pictures just last week. And then they get into the whole true calendar. We talked a little bit about that, how the Essenes that were in Qumran, they had their own, how is their community rule, so to speak, their book. But they talked about the light and the darkness and the sons of light. Jesus uses a lot of this terminology. And that's why, so did John the Baptist. And they think that that's why he did maybe have a lot to do with the Essenes, because there was a lot of that terminology going on in the Gospels that you don't see from anyone else. This is actually a full manuscript Bible. And then we got into the museum. And I love that because if you've heard the word cherubim, when you think of a cherubim, what do you think of? You usually see these little short, round, baby face angels. No, that's actually what it's a cherubim, and that's what they look like.
And you wouldn't want that on a Valentine's Day card, just saying.
When we talked about Daniel, we talked about Revelation, where it had the face of a man and it had wings of an eagle and legs of a ox and all the different things. That's cherubim. These are actual mummy sarcophagus from way, I mean, this is way back. Like they were even saying, some of this stuff was back with Moses and Ramsey, that far back. Just some of the other stuff for Egypt, which, look how well preserved this is. It's just mind-blowing how the detail hasn't faded, the ink hasn't faded. I mean, look at that one. It's just, yeah. And so this one on this side is another, that bovine, that Baal. And that was like over 6,000 years ago that they found. Now, when we got going through, this was our tour guide for that day. He's the one that taught us all about ritual baths.
Oh my gosh, anything you would ever not want to know.
Yep, he knew it. And these are sarcophagus. Why is that important? Well, in that display, can you tell me what that is?
A cow.
Huh?
Looks like a cow.
It does kind of look like a cow, but it's got an even cooler story than that.
That is a heel bone, and that is a nail from a crucifixion. Proving that they did crucify people with hands and feet. This, they believe, at least it's been the tradition, that this is Matthew, the disciple Matthew. That's his actuary, where his bones, well, his bones aren't there anymore, but
that's where it would have been.
that's where it would have been. This one is Herod. He got the full thing. We talked about that last week, how they would put the body inside a tomb, or maybe we talked about it with youth group, I don't remember now. They would put the body inside a tomb, and that's why they would wrap it, put the spices on, and with the humidity and the climate and everything, within a year, the body would completely decay and decompose. And they would go in at the end of the year, they would roll the stone back, and they would take the bones, and they would get a box as long as the femur bones, and as wide as the skull. That's where you get the skull and crossbones. And they would lay all the bones in the box, because it was easier to bury.
That's why Matthew's was so much smaller. That's how they did it.
Bury a box than it is to try to bury a full person. But Herod had a full box. He had a full coffin.
Well, and that's why when they talk about Jesus, the tomb that he used hadn't been used before, no one had died, because they would reuse those tombs, because after that year, then if it was a large one, like we believe Jesus would have used for those 2 days, there would have been several places. So if more than one family member passed away, they could put them in there and just hold their nose probably while they went in, because it wouldn't have smelled very good no matter how many spices you put on there.
Oh. Wow. That's this. Yep. So, At least for this week. Next week, we're gonna get into Jerusalem. This was kind of that catch-all, the move from last week, and where he would have gone back and forth to Jerusalem. Next week, I'm gonna show you the side of the hill where he did the Beatitudes, where he fed the 5,000. And then we are going to start getting into Jerusalem, the places where Jesus went. The Mount of Olives, place where he cried out tears of blood. The place where Garden of Gethsemane, Caiaphas' home, where he was tried, the dungeon underneath where he was probably kept until 6 o'clock that morning when they took him to Pilate. I think I still have a picture of Pilate's place. It's the only thing in Jerusalem outside Caiaphas' home that's clear up out of town that is actually the same thing. There's one spot there that was where Pilate tried, where he washed his hands. And then we will go back up on the Mount of Olives, where he was crucified, and we will look at the tomb of where he was. We have the garden tomb that's kind of like, you can see
the traditional side,
right?
But then there's the one that they actually think that he was buried at. We talked about that a little bit at the beginning, that there's a lot of traditions over there that aren't necessarily, as they're continuing to learn more, accurate, but they keep the tradition, one, because it makes them a lot of money, and two, because then the actual places don't become a tourist site.
Well, I think that's why God does it, but
Right.
they do it because it would be bad for business if they've been saying, well, the birth of Christ, the birthplace, where they've said all along, that's not where Jesus was born. Even the Jews know that's not where he was born, but that's where they've been making money at it for how many years? Actually, a lot of this stuff. So, like the Holy Sepulchre, if you're Catholic and they make the trek to Jerusalem, they say that everything happened within the four corners of this Holy Sepulchre. Well, that's not true. And unfortunately, where that all came about was Constantine's mom. She was a really God-fearing mother, and she went on a Holy Land exposition, and she had money. And so when she was over there, she was looking for all this stuff. If you heard about the wood of the cross, that's like, it's almost like the Holy Shroud too, you know. Everybody has a piece of the wooden cross. Well, when she was over there, they sold her a piece of the cross. And it probably wasn't, but they saw she had money and took her for it. Same thing here. They told her that, oh, this is where he was tried, where he was buried, where he was everything. And it's in a crater. It was a quarry. Now we know that he was crucified, what? On a hill. Not down in a quarry. And the worst part was that quarry was actually a temple to Aphrodite, Artemis. So the Holy Sepulchre is literally built over this quarry. And that is not where Jesus was crucified or buried.
And it wouldn't have been where they would have done it. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Not
they
in the city walls.
No. They're going to put him up where people coming in can look.
And they would not have buried anyone inside the city walls either. So the pictures that we'll get into next week, you'll get to see what the new Eastern Gate looks like. We'll have pictures of the tunnels of Hezekiah and the aqueduct that we walked down from David's palace. And it was really narrow to go through.
But it was just amazing to think, like, who had been there and what it was dug for. I mean, the marvel of the technology that they used and the architecture and everything, and again, the hands that had touched it. I know we talked about that last week. I remember they had told us that it was something from Noah's time. There was rocks on this one wall, and I was like, I'm touching something that was, I mean, that's just hard to,
because usually they build on top, so you don't get to see those bottom layers a lot of the times.
But there we did.
Yep. So I guess any questions? I was thinking a lot, but there's so much, you know. I had over 4,000 pictures the first go around, and we had over 6,800, I think, this go around, not counting all the videos. Because you just video, it was better video than to just take pictures. Yeah. It's just cool, though, to be able to see it, the Bible in living color. Mm-hmm. You know, when you know the stories and you get to walk there and you go, this is where this would have happened. You know, it comes, how could anyone not believe when you're When you're just there and you're touching these spots, you're seeing these things, and you can just feel it. And that was the interesting thing. A lot of Israel leaves me cold. In fact, Jerusalem left me the coldest. It wasn't until this time when we were actually up on the Mount of Olives in those two spots that it felt right. Everything else felt pretty cold. But the Sea of Galilee, oh, my favorite spot. I just stayed at the Sea of Galilee the whole time. You could just feel that, you know, I don't know, just somebody's energy. You could just feel that there. That and the Springs of Gideon, which was farther south. We didn't get to go to that this time. The first time I went, that was one of my most favorite spots.
In Shiloh. You could feel God's presence there for sure.
Yeah.
There were just places that you couldn't go and not come away changed.